What triggered your Kundalini awakening?
I was living with a friend and we were working on a pyramid. And this pyramid was about 10 feet high, but it cost in today's dollars close to about $250,000 to build.
For some people listening that are not familiar with sacred geometry, can we define what it is and give examples of some important shapes?
Yeah, and we can also show you some pictures
Yeah, that would be great.
because that helps people see how everything has that certain pattern that it subscribes to.
Welcome to American Gypsy Podcast. I'm your host, Gypsy, and today I have two special guests, Gail and Gregory Hoag. They are visionaries with over 4 decades of expertise in sacred geometry. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Glad to have you on. I guess before we get started on sacred geometry, can you guys give a little background on your experience and how you came about where you are right now?
Sure. We've actually been working with sacred geometry for 40 years. And so we've explored a lot with sacred geometry. And most recently, this past year, we've published a book called Sacred Geometry, the Universal Language of Divine Alignment. And where our interest really lies is with three-dimensional sacred geometry, because we live in a three-dimensional world. And so sacred geometry, as the ancients understood, have an effect on us. It supports us in being able to connect to those higher levels of who we are. The ancient people knew that when they built temples and sacred sites, that there were very specific ways that they could do that would trigger that relationship, that higher capability to tap into their spirituality, their intuition, their sense of higher knowing. And, that's culturally a very important thing. In our modern days, that hasn't necessarily been as true. And yet I believe that that's something that is really important right now. So you'll probably like since you have a background in tech. Where I really got intrigued by sacred geometry was with reading the books from Buckminster Fuller. He is the genius who created the geodesic dome, and he understood that universe is created in very geometric ways, in very specific ways. And one of the things he talked a lot about are tetrahedrons, three-dimensional triangles. And I was just fascinated with his work because I wanted to understand that exploration of how everything is energy. Everything first starts out as pure energy before it comes into this dimension, into what we call physical world. And it has to do that in such a manner that the energy can find its way in the most effective, efficient way and reproduce itself, but not reproduce itself exactly, but with all kinds of variations. Like, for instance, if you look at snowflakes, you can tell, oh, these are all snowflakes. When you look carefully and you get down to a closer examination, every snowflake is different. Every person is different. And yet we're all based on those same cycles and rhythms and the ways that energy can come into physical realm. And so I found it an amazing topic. And my background as an artist kind of brought me into being very intrigued about what sacred geometry is. And more so, though, in my quest, in my spiritual evolution, I began to realize that it was extremely important in helping us be able to explore the greater realms of who we are and live our lives with that greater connection as well. So that's kind of just a little peek at what brought me into this conversation.
And for me, I basically studied the sciences in college. And then after graduating in 1970, I spent the next decade in between doing several businesses. I started pursuing higher understanding. I worked with different spiritual masters and lived in some ashrams. But what eventually changed my life so significantly was in 1980, I had an experience of my Kundalini awakening. And if you're familiar with Kundalini, or for those of your listeners who aren't, it's basically an energy that is rising up from the physical, from the earth. We often think of Earth Mother moving back through the body to reach for higher connection. And what happens is it starts to shift what's going on in your chakra system and everything inside to bring it into a higher vibrational resonance. So what was happening for me is energy was moving through my body so strongly that I literally had holes being burned in the center of my hands and in my feet just from the energy moving through. It was shifting my physical flesh. And I always thought, this is supposed to be subtle energy, but it doesn't feel very subtle when I'm, interacting with it like that. And so what happened is after a few years, I started connecting with higher information. I started being able to communicate with higher energies and see physical patterns that exist before 3D matter comes about. And so I was building what I was seeing, and that's what happened when I met Gail, as I shared with her some of the things I was building. And when she put her hands over them, she could feel the energy. And that was over 40 years ago now. And we've been pursuing this avenue ever since of how we can replicate what universe is doing on all these levels of building physical matter, from crystals to different animal forms, insect forms, bacteria, human forms, life and non-life, and how even the stars group in certain patterns, and the earth and the moon and the sun follow very particular geometries that allow them to resonate with life, or life really starts resonating with the way the moon and the earth dance together and with certain geometric patterns. And so when we bring those patterns that we see everywhere, and that's what we call sacred geometry, is that when we duplicate those geometries and bring them into people's lives, the energy shifts and people are able to have their lives start to shift because they're starting to resonate with something that is at the natural foundation of all creation. And so it's a really remarkable journey.
What triggered your Kundalini awakening?
I was living with a friend and we were working on a pyramid. And this pyramid was about 10 feet high, but it cost in today's dollars close to about $250,000 to build, because we were working with 3-foot crystals. We were engineering it to very precise measurements, working with a capstone that had gold and silver and copper layered. And all of this created such an energy flow. We were taking turns sleeping in it. And for me, my guidance, my higher self took advantage of this situation to catalyze the Kundalini within my body. And at first, really for the first year or two, it was very psychotic. The energy flows, it was like cold fire running through my body. And I was starting to relive past lifetimes. I could see things from other perspectives. And it at times felt as schizophrenic as I'd ever want to be. And I didn't have a lot of crosshairs to help me zone in on, time and space in this reality. I was really driven out of my body a lot. It was an interesting, powerful time.
Is there a certain culture or origin for sacred geometry?
I wouldn't say there's a particular culture, but there have been many different cultures that have had these sacred principles carried forward. And I think that there's some very important work that's been done by a man, Graham Hancock, who's written several books that is referencing the potential for civilizations that existed over 9,000 years ago before the last major deluge. What we see in the Bible and talking about Noah and the flood, well, there were floods that were referenced in almost every ancient culture worldwide. And what Graham Hancock started to hypothesize, and what has been shown since he started his work, is there's scientific evidence that there were comets to actually impact the planet, comet fragments that caused a lot of polar ice to melt because of their strikes in the northern hemisphere. And so around 12,000 years ago, there were some of these strikes, just as the planet was coming out of the ice age. It produced so much fresh water going into the oceans that it shifted some of the ocean currents and consequently threw us back into a mini ice age again. And this happened again about 9,600 years ago, at which time any remnants of ancient civilizations seems to have been destroyed. However, a lot of their knowledge of working with numbers, working with sacred geometry, was carried into the different civilizations of the world at large, which was basically a hunter-gatherer situation. And then all of a sudden, all these different groups from Central America to Egypt, to Africa, to Asia and China, they started working with similar numbers and similar patterns that was carried forward in their temples, in the things they built, like Stonehenge and the pyramids. And these numbers we see are the same everywhere. And in our book, we started looking at these ancient numbers. And when we started applying degrees to the numbers, we saw that they built geometries with certain degrees on the surface. And when we started building these geometries, we saw that that's what was being referenced in some of, say, for example, in the Rig Veda, there are over 10,800 different stanzas. And inside each one are 40 syllables. And when we look at the number 10,800, that's the number we get when we add the diameter of the moon to the diameter of the sun, with a couple zeros knocked off to put them into the same magnitude. And those diameters were referenced in the Rig Veda. And when you multiply the 40 syllables found in each stanza, you get a number of 4,320, which is the radius of the sun. And that also coincides with the exact geometry of a photon, because two scientists in Poland recently discovered that a photon, the carrier of all energy, has a geometry, and it's related to the sun that produces it. And so these numbers are hidden throughout history, and they're referencing things like the diameter of the earth and the moon and the way they dance together to create geometries that are referencing the way our body is built, with something called the phi ratio. And so it's throughout history, throughout many civilizations, we see it coming up and percolating to the surface.
For some people listening that are not familiar with sacred geometry, can we define what it is and give examples of some important shapes?
Yeah, and we can also show you some pictures,
Yeah, that would be great.
because that helps people see how everything has that certain pattern that it subscribes to. And Gregory can get up some of those pictures, like whether they're turtle shells or geometric shapes of atoms, flowers, the nautilus shell, galactic spirals, the pineapple. Take a look at those geometries and just looking at the way pineapple is created, and we talked about snowflakes earlier, the way that bees create their colonies. It's all done in these amazing geometric patterns. And the reason, again, that they use these patterns is because it is such an economical, efficient, and perfect way for energy, just plain raw energy, to come into form and to be able to duplicate all kinds of variations on the same theme. And so, when we were talking about ancient cultures, certainly we see that in how these different temples were constructed. They had very precise measurements and phi ratio. And in fact, Greg, you can bring back that other frame now. The phi ratio, also called the golden ratio, is a way that our bodies are designed, where there is that particular ratio, 1.618, and it's a irrational number that goes on forever. And yet, in mathematics, it's irrational, but in physical form, it's amazingly rational. It's how things are formed. It's how our bodies are functioned, how our whole world is created with that precision. Our DNA is working with these same variations on the same theme.
I can show you with this caliper that measures the small part divided into the large part is that number Gail referenced called 1.6180. It keeps going, but in geometry, you can see it as a physical dimension, construct, like the middle finger, the small digit to my whole finger is in that proportion. My finger to my hand is in that proportion. My hand to my elbow is in that proportion. My head to my navel to my feet. And so this is the way the body is constructed. And when we build geometries, like this geometry sitting next to me has these proportions hidden within it. And when we work with these proportions in a geometry that is in our environment, we start feeling that energy. And this proportion that we're talking about, if we look, let me see if I can find it at with the way the sun and the moon, or excuse me, the moon and the earth, the diameters of the two, when you add it together, you get the same number of degrees as this geometry. And when you work with that aspect called the phi ratio, you see how putting the moon next to the earth, it works with that phi ratio. And there are many different ways that the two dance together to create this same geometry that works with our body and works with flowers and works with insects. So life is being supported by literally the diameter of the moon dancing with the diameter of the earth. And when you bring that into a temple, you can work with those proportions that start to vibrate with that energy as well. And what happens in today's society, with technology, we have surrounded ourselves with electromagnetic frequencies, with artificial environments and ingredients, and different toxic materials. And we have certain fears that are being generated in a lot of the politics and things that people are using to literally control people through their fear. And our stresses are all disconnecting us from this higher vibrational connection. And so I have another image here where we kind of outline how the electromagnetic pollution, the stress, the negative emotions, our judgments, the toxins, all of this comes in and blocks that flow of energy that wants to come into our lives from higher self, from the bigger part of ourselves. You see, we're like the tip of an iceberg. Only a small amount of us shows up in this third dimensional reality. And yet, the subtle parts of our being, where our emotions hang out, our mental body, our spiritual body, we can maybe feel that a little more when we're in nature and we're sitting next to a stream in the sunshine. But all of the stuff that's going on with technology and our environments, where there's a lot of cement and rebar and electromagnetic frequencies, it's disconnecting us from who we truly are. So what we're able to do with these geometries, and we found a way to shrink them and put them onto pendants that will allow them to allow the geometries to be moved into a two-dimensional format. So I'm trying to find it
Go back.
here.
Yeah.
Like these are the pendants that we're wearing, and this is the front side and the back side. And we have antenna systems inside that resonate with these other energies we're talking about. And by bringing these into an environment where people can wear them, they literally start vibrating with these energies that they've been missing naturally in their environment for, literally hundreds of years since Nikolai Tesla started bringing in frequencies. And when we started moving away from the land in the early 1800s with the Industrial Revolution.
So, I always like to share with people that when we go out in nature and we find a beautiful place in nature where we can hear the sounds of the birds, we can feel the breeze, we may have a stream running close to us and we can hear the trickle, the sounds of the water. All of the energy of those natural places, it does something to us. It relaxes us. It makes us feel good. It actually opens up our creative energy. It enables us to feel connected. And that connection is essential for the health of our lives. It's essential for the health of our physical body, emotional, spiritual, all of these different aspects of who we are depend on that connection. And yet we live a life that has, as Gregory was just sharing, so many different disruptions that are contrary to what it is that really feeds us at a mind, body, and spirit level. So what we experience in nature is sacred geometry. It's that beautiful pattern and way that pure energy comes into form. To me, I love to share with people that sometimes, we look around and think, oh my gosh, we're in such a crazy, chaotic world. And yet what we see is that it is incredibly organized. There is rhythm and pattern and cycle and things that we can depend upon. And when we get closer to that, then our lives start working better. And then, we are more able to reach into all the different levels of who we are and have greater happiness, even more prosperity. Because when we're working with those cycles, then things work. There's something that I like to talk about with synchronicity. That experience, like if you think about a person and 15 minutes later, the phone rings and it's them. Well, those are natural ways. When we are in sync, when we're in rhythm with the way that the cycles of life and the way that energy flows, when we're in sync with that, then those are the kinds of things that happen all the time. And so what we have been really dedicating our lives to is creating different kinds of technologies that support people in those essential connections. And that makes a dramatic difference in the quality of life. and the level of stress that so many people go through.
I noticed there was in that necklace that you showed, there was some crystals in there, not just sacred geometries. Can you talk about the value of the crystals and what they bring to the whole equation?
Yeah. And, they're actually high quality gems. And the different gems that, they have different structures and different colors. And so gems have a way of adding something to us on the emotional level. So we have rubies and emeralds and amethysts and citrine and all kinds of beautiful stones that are part of this design. And the way that we've created the pendants is that all the pendants have the same geometry on the outside and
Inside.
on the inside as well. And inside, what you don't see are these different things that we've created that are like little antenna systems, including certain crystals. There are some very specific crystals in there and different rare earth materials that have a certain resonance. So what we are bringing together is that resonance along with what those different gems contribute. And as a result, we have people, we've been doing this for 40 years. And so we have people all over the world who've been working with our tools, and they find that their lives start to shift because they're connected. And in that connection, things happen. Like I remember there was a woman who, she's a realtor, and she had been working on a project for over a year. And it was working with real estate that was very expensive, and it was taking forever for it to come to any conclusion. She got the pendant within a week, everything came together. Well, I mean, you could say, well, maybe it was going to happen anyhow, which it might have been. And yet, when we are in that flow, things naturally happen. We come together. Those synchronicities happen. And that's a very important part of how we see providing tools for people. Gregory likes to share this story about a woman who said, one of the things I love about the pendant is that my grandchildren, when I used to come in, would all run away from me. And ever since I started wearing the pendant, they just crawl all over me because there's a certain resonance. There's a certain energy that that children feel, that other people feel. Even we have there was a person who worked in the prison system who said, prisoners are treating me so much better. It's that frequency, because everything really, when it gets down to it, is vibration. It's that energetic vibration. And when we do something that shifts our energy to be more harmonious, then it's felt in so many different ways.
Yeah, I definitely believe in that. I've gotten to witness that in my own life. It's like when you seeing, even when in the same setting, just changing your vibration and how that attracts people, places, and things,
Mhm.
opportunities. So, because everything is energy. And
It is. It is.
And
wow.
so this is automatically shifting the energy in your field all the time. And it's like a great place to start from. Let that be the springboard, and you start watching everything on the outside reorient toward yourself in a different way because your vibration is shifted. And we don't realize how much the things in the world around us are affecting the way we feel. We look at the person next to us if we're not feeling good and think, oh, it must be because of them. it could be just the accumulation of toxins, the electromagnetic frequencies that, the phase of the moon and the stars, what's going on in the conjunctions in your life where the energy is not flowing as well. But when you are in that space where it flows in and it's at a raised frequency when it's coming in, and it's at a higher frequency when it comes out of you. So you just start operating from a place where rather than going for protection, you don't play with that game, because when people are trying to protect themselves from things, that's really a form of fear. And if we're working from a place where we're not even going into being concerned about all this stuff, but we're riding above it, that's in a place when we're really creative, when we're really able to transform the world around us.
What is your perspective on numerology when we're talking about communicating with higher realms?
Well, what modern numerology has become, and assigning certain values to numbers and the way it applies to your name, etc., we look at the numbers just purely from a geometric standpoint, from a perspective where they have qualities as well as quantities. So in our new book on sacred geometry, we go through all the different numbers from 1 to 9, and we start talking about how the odd numbers often have more male characteristics, and the even numbers are more female in their aspects. And so the way they combine together and work together and display, the things in this world. So we work with number, we work with 1 as the divine masculine and 2 as the divine feminine. And the way that 2 as duality lets us really interact with other things, because if you just have 1, there's nothing to reflect on or interact with. And so all the numbers are very important to understand when we're looking at how the world is structured and how our geometries are created. And we can look at the degrees in a geometry and look at the numbers it provides, and that will tell us its character and how the energy flows. So numbers are very important, but it's on a much more foundational level than what we see in numerology. Just like modern astronomy, unless it's a really good person reading it, is often, what you see in the newspapers is nothing like the depth of what you can go into with good astrology. And so it is with the numbers that describe our universe.
If someone wanted to study sacred geometry and get into it, what is there any resources you would recommend?
Well,
I think our book is a great place to start. And our book, Gregory, do you want to put up the image of the book? There it is. Sacred Geometry, the Universal Language of Divine Alignment. It was just published in the January of this year. And what's really interesting about this book is that it's a little different than any other book I've seen on sacred geometry. Actually very different. And it addresses both people who don't know much about sacred geometry as well as people who do. And it creates like a different way. Like, for instance, when Gregory was just talking about number, we spend a lot of time talking about that exploration of number and how you go from 1 into 2 and how things actually create themselves, because 1 in and of itself is an initiator. It's an unknowable. There is nothing that that it really can create in itself. It needs a reflection. It needs to have the number 2 in order to then create that polarity, that duality. And in that, when those numbers start to work together, it then moves into the creative cycle where threeness happens, where you start having these different variations of creation. And you'll see it in actual geometry, you see it out in the world. So we explore how geometry is so germane to this whole way of looking at energy and creation. We also talk about things from historical basis as well as lots of images in our book. There's many different images, some of like what we showed you here before. And, we really get into good explanations of that. So I think that our book is a great place to start. There are just wonderful other books out there. And I'd say start here. And we're actually offering a free chapter of our book if you go to iconnecttoall.com/chapter. And that's the letter I, the word connect, the number 2, the word all, ALL.com/chapter. You can read our first chapter, which is about consciousness. So we actually start the conversation about sacred geometry based on consciousness. Because creation in and of itself is not just an abstract thing. And I think that that abstraction sort of turned a lot of people off when they were going through school and learning about math and geometry. And they were looking for a way to relate to it. And so what we bring to light is that everything in creation has all the rhythms and cycles and patterns, and it's founded in consciousness. And that consciousness is love. And you can't extract consciousness from creation. So that's where we start showing that this is also not just some kind of mathematical thing, but it's a spiritual journey as well. And we help people to understand their relationship to the world that they're living in and what's possible and who they are.
And for the listeners, I'll have the link to their book and information in
Thank
the
you.
description. Well, Gail and Gregory, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. Is there anything you want to leave the listeners with before we close it out?
Sure. Do you want to start?
No, go ahead.
It's like I don't have anything in mind when you ask that, other than everything is an opportunity. And whether it's an opening of, is there something you want to share, or anything that's going on in our lives, if we redefine it, review it. I mean, it's interesting to take a view of something and look at it from another higher perspective to see how spirit is supporting me. Because that's why we start our book with consciousness. At the basis of everything in creation is consciousness. And that consciousness is love. It is what is supporting your life, my life, our lives together. And if we understand that from that higher perspective, we can look at everything that's happening in our life, whether we want to view it as positive, or sometimes it may be, this doesn't feel so good right now, what's happening. However, how is universe supporting me in my growth through what's happening right now? How can I see that spark of God, that spark of love in what's happening to me right now in my life? And when I can see that, it opens up so many more possibilities for my life having meaning, for my life having an opportunity to make a difference, not just for myself, but for someone else, for many else's, someone else's, because that's really why we're here. We're here to bring that love in and to be able to share it and to be of service to all, because we are all connected, even though we don't see it often from our individual perspective. But the more we open up to these higher realms of energy, the more we see our only reason for being alive is to grow that experience in this reality and share it with others.
And the one thing that I'll tag onto that, because I think Gregory just did a great job of expressing some of the philosophies behind what we do. And when we look at everything in the perspective of energy, the thing about energy that you can always count on is that it's always in motion. Life is always in change and evolution. And so are we. From the time that we get started as an infant to the time for us to exit, when hopefully we've had the opportunity to live a very full life. We have gone through all these evolutionary changes. The earth has gone through so many evolutionary changes. And the more that we understand it from that view, that there's some consciousness, there's love behind it, there's pattern behind it. There's something that we can feel connected to that feels good. And that way we can ride along with this journey in a way where we're not resisting it, but we're opening ourselves up to the beauty of what is here. Our souls have brought us into this realm, and I believe it's with a great higher purpose for us to really appreciate, deeply experience what creation is, and to become co-creators, and to understand what that experience of creation and co-creation is. And sacred geometry helps us in learning what that means and how to apply it to all different aspects within our lives and grow and evolve and bring more love into our lives and into the lives of others.
Thank you both for that advice. I can definitely see how life can always be good if you can change your perspective on how you're viewing everything. Even when you're going through bad things, you can look at it as a learning, lessons you needed to learn for the next step. Thank you both for being on the show, taking the time out. For the listeners, again, I'll have their information in the description. Thank you for listening. Peace.
Blessings
Blessings and love.
and love.